So, in case you just missed my little intro, I'm Megan Carter, and I am here. I'm going to be asking Noel Katz some questions tonight as you send them in. So be sure to be typing up those questions, and I'm going to get this started and let Noel take over because he's here. We are here to see. So, Noel, if you'll give us just a brief little bio about yourself, and we'll kick it off.
Yes, a brief bio about myself.
Yeah,
I've been writing musicals since I was 14 years old. And then the first one that got produced was when I was, I think, 18 years old. And then I had several produced in New York in my 20s. And then they got kind of fewer and fewer, but I continued to get musicals produced in New York until I think 2016 was the last one, and then started getting musicals produced in California. Or there's been one produced in California, but two are in production now. So they supposedly will be in front of an audience sometime this year, some way, sometime.
All right. Wow, that's exciting. All right. So if your first was 14, when did you start writing? Like, when did you know this was what you wanted to do?
So I have a couple of origin stories that are kind of untrue, or they're kind of like turned into little fables. The first fable I like to tell is the Big Boys Don't Cry fable. When I was my daughter's age, she is 8. So when I was 8, I would frequently cry. And in my generation, when you were a little boy who cried, you were constantly told, big boys don't cry. It was just a thing that you would say to any male crier.
Yeah.
My parents took me to my first Broadway show when I was 8. And that show is Mame. And there is a scene in Mame that is very moving. And it has to do with older Patrick, as he is called, consoling Mame after her husband has died. And he sang to her a song that he had sung when he was a child, called My Best Girl. And during that sequence, I cried, and I looked around, and I saw that everybody in the audience was crying, including big boys, including grown men. And I like to think that from that moment, I wanted to create musical theater because it is a place where people of any age and any gender are allowed to cry. And so that's origin story number one. The second origin story has to do with my 13-year-old attraction to Holly Clayman. So Holly Clayman was a pretty girl who kind of lived in the same direction that I lived. And she would ride her bicycle home from school. And I was kind of too shy to talk to her and tell her how I felt. So I would bicycle after her, singing original love songs at the top of my lungs. But if you understand the way wind works, who's ever in front of a 2-bicycle caravan cannot hear the person from behind. So I'm absolutely certain that Holly did not hear any of the songs that I sang. And I've since confirmed this. I mean, I saw her like a year ago at a reunion, and she confirmed for me that she did not hear a single song that I sang to her. But I soon had enough kind of love songs to Holly that I was ready to write an entire musical, which I did in 9th grade.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Well, interview's over. Those were great stories already. I'm already emotional. So
but they're very emotional stories.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay. All right. Well, so we got some questions coming in. Kendra's on. So for our fantasy world, our staff member Kendra actually knows Noel from Circle up in New York City. So she says hi, and she wants to know what started your love for Broadway. Where did you get all your knowledge? We kind of just got a brief look at your Broadway love. So where did you get all this knowledge? Where did it come from? School, just studying?
It's kind of like I did my own research into Broadway, but I wanted to feel a connection to Broadway once my family moved away. So when I was 8 years old, we moved away from Broadway, and on my wall was a bulletin board. And on this bulletin board, I started cutting out little colorful strips of paper. I happen to have Post-its here, but picture, construction paper cut with scissors. I also have scissors here. So I'm cutting out these colored papers, and then I'm tacking them onto my bulletin board to recreate the map of the Broadway Theater District. And then I put on top of that, in the right locations, I would cut out little marquees for every theater. So I'd put the name of the theater, and then on top of that, I would put like another layer that was the name of the show. And whenever the show would change, I would change the marquee. Is this making any sense at all?
Yeah.
So that
sounds like the perfect pandemic project. So
it is. So I was connected to what's on Broadway throughout my exile. And then I came back to New York as soon as I could when I was 18.
Huh. Did you go to school? Did you go to college and school for what you are doing, or?
So I went to college in New York, which is the important part. And I went to Columbia, but my parents were adamant in saying, we're not paying for an Ivy League education for you to learn anything that is related to performing arts at all. You can take dramatic literature, but you can't take drama, and you can't take acting, and you can't do anything. Yeah. So luckily, there was this thing called the BMI Musical Theater Writing Workshop. And it was a free weekly workshop run by a man named Lehman Engel. And it was, at the time, the only thing you could take that was an education in writing musical theater. So I was the very youngest member of that. And that, I spent 4 years there. So my education in writing musicals was kind of simultaneous with my college years, even if I didn't learn anything at the college.
All right. So Katie is on. For all of you, Katie, our fantasy family, Katie Broad also knows our good friend Noel. So she says, hello, my BFF. See,
I told you.
You did. You told me.
My BFF, and we will forever identify each other as such.
Yeah, that's so cute. All right. Karen wants to know, do you write both music and lyrics? If so, which comes first?
Yes, I generally write music and lyrics at the same time. But, when you're writing a song, you are constantly revising the song. So sometimes the song will start with a melody, sometimes the song will start with a lyric, but generally I forget which came first because I've changed both so many times for the music and lyrics to work together. So that's a not very good answer to that question because it can go either way. In one of my shows, I'm writing with lyrics by somebody who has a birthday today, and that is William Shakespeare. So in one of my projects, all the lyrics come from Shakespeare's sonnets and songs, and so those came first by a few hundred years.
All right. Chris says, first off, thank you for doing this. Yes, thank you for doing this. He wants to know, do you have any resources that you think are underutilized or unknown that might help students that are interested in building their musical rep or audition? Like, what piece of advice would you give for students?
Right. So the student is looking for a larger rep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Underutilized resources. Um, there are a zillion cast albums out there, and I'm kind of addicted to listening to cast albums. It's funny that in recent years I haven't done it a lot because I don't want to hear the album before I see the show.
Mhm.
But if you kind of know that you're not going to see the show because, let's say, it's closed and nobody's ever going to do it again, then by all means go out and listen to that cast album. So the for me, that's the main resource, is to find more and more obscure cast albums. In other words, you can listen to 500 cast albums, and by your 400th, you're listening to stuff that nobody's ever heard. There are these sets of albums called Hidden Treasures. There's the Kander Neb Hidden Treasure album, and that is filled with Kander Neb songs, usually sung by them. And I promise you, you haven't heard most of the songs on that album. I mean, they wrote New York, New York, but on the album, you'll hear an earlier version that doesn't sound anything like it that they wrote for that same project.
All right. What do you think the hardest part about what you do is?
Well, my answer has changed over the past 6 weeks because, I'm now in rehearsal and on a show, and we hold these rehearsals via Zoom. And they're always kind of a mess because it's a very large cast.
Yeah.
So the cast can't fit in one Zoom screen, which might be 16 people. So we're going through screen after screen in order to see the entire cast. And of course, you can't have two people sing together in different places with different mics. So there's a lot of headaches associated with rehearsing those songs, because being live in the same Zoom room doesn't really work.
Yeah.
So basically what we usually do is we play a recording of me singing the song. Everybody turns off their mics and they're all singing at home. And I have no idea whether they're singing it correctly or not. So that's the hardest thing I've ever experienced.
Cool. Yeah, that's a new challenge. Do you have a favorite Broadway show that you like to, that you just keep going back to?
I do have a favorite Broadway show, and it's kind of an odd choice. My favorite Broadway show is How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And I realize it's not the greatest show ever written. It is, however, a show in which every song and every scene is funny and gets laughs. And I so admire the ability to write a comedy song that actually gets the audience laughing. And, Frank Lesser and Abe Burrows, in writing that show, they achieved it. They really got the audience to laugh at everything. And it's an ambition of mine, and it's why that's my favorite show.
All right. Let's see. On another side, Kristen wants to know, who is your favorite composer? Do you have a favorite?
Yes, well, I just mentioned him.
No one.
Right. Frank Lesser, who wrote How to Succeed, is my favorite songwriter, and I certainly don't consider How to Succeed his best score. He wrote a musical called The Most Happy Fella that has a tremendous amount of singing. It's almost all singing. It's 3 acts long, and it's the most emotional experience I can imagine. It just gets to me how these characters kind of interact and deal with love and betrayal and forgiveness. And it's just a very emotional experience seeing that show. However, Frank Lesser's most famous musical is Guys and Dolls. And Guys and Dolls has a has a character in it named Adelaide, and Adelaide is what I named my daughter. So you can see that the love of Frank Lesser goes rather deep with me. He wrote the famous show from which I got my daughter's name. He wrote this incredible show, Most Happy Fellow, that I think is a masterpiece of musical theater. And he also wrote my favorite show, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which I admit is not his best show.
Huh.
It did win him the Pulitzer Prize, though, so there's that.
Just that. That's that little thing. Kendra says, as a lover of musical theater, how do you feel about all the live musicals that are being produced on TV in the last few years?
Right. Well, you used an important word there, live. Musical theater is about breathing the same air as the performer. If you're seeing a musical, you're breathing the air as the performer. And a friend of mine loves telling the story of me seeing Sunday in the Park with George, because I had a very good seat. And I was seated directly behind my friend, who was in the second row. So I was in the third row. And Bernadette Peters was singing Children and Art on the stage right. And I found this unbelievably moving, and I started to sob. And my friend is convinced that Bernadette Peters could hear me sobbing. And then she knows that what she's putting across the footlights is affecting me in the audience, the grown man crying. And she can, and my sobbing is being heard by the performer, and that interaction across the footlights is what live musical theater is about. So you're going to put something on TV, are you? And there's a cathode tube or a screen or we can knock on it.
No.
There it is. That's the sound of me hitting my computer screen with that. There's no way that a performance on TV is going to be affected by the reaction of the audience that's watching it.
Yeah.
So therefore, anything that says it's live on TV really isn't. It's live in the studio in which the cameras are rolling. And I guess you can see it at the same time if they're calling it a live performance and it's really going out live. But that rarely happens, and it kind of doesn't matter because most people are going to watch it later.
Yeah, that's true. That is so true.
It's Memorex.
Oh. Grace wants to know, whoop, it jumped. What is the most important lesson you've learned from musical theater?
So the most important lesson from the musicals themselves, boy, I would say the most important lesson is empathy. That is to understand how other people are feeling. And I think that's what musicals generally are about. It was a few days ago, it was the 75th anniversary of the opening of Carousel. And, Carousel is about these troubled people who are unable to communicate a true feeling like I love you. So they sing If I Loved You, and they're unable to communicate properly until the man is dead and comes back as a ghost and is able to whisper into his widow's ear, know that I loved you. And that level of understanding is what you learn from musicals, that we've got to speak our emotions and not be bottled up. And I think that is the way I want to answer that question.
Yeah. I'm the wrong person to do this interview. I'm too emotional.
I'm looking around for my tissue box now.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better.
It's over here.
Good. Okay, good.
All right.
That's perfect. Now we're ready.
Yes.
All right. All right. Darcy wants to know, what is one thing a performer can do to set themselves apart in an audition? Or is there something that you might look for specifically when in a vocal talent?
Right. Ooh, vocal talent. I'm looking for people who aren't like everybody else, who are acting the song in a unique way. So you've all seen these lists of songs you should never do in an audition because they're overdone. And yes, there's a good reason not to do certain songs, but if you come in and have a unique spin on that song, it's all about the acting. It is never about the voice. It's something I say again and again in my teaching. It's not about the voice. It's never about the voice. If they want to hear a certain note, they'll ask you to sing it. They'll call you back and say, here, sing this note. But what you need to do in your audition is to show up as an individual who's not like everybody else and who's not showing off specific notes because it's all about the acting. Mm-hmm. So show off those interpretive notes, those acting beats. Yeah. And that's going to propel you to the callback stage. And then at the callback stage, you'll know more about what they're looking for. Yeah. And can listen to what they're asking you to do at that callback.
All right. That makes sense. Let's see. Chris has 2 questions. He said, what do you think is the most common directorial note you give to cast and crew? Is there one pretty common?
Boy, maybe it's that I don't give a lot of notes, and that's why I'm having trouble answering this. The most common note, you know, it kind of goes with my last answer, is to look alive. That is, be engaged and be living the things that your character is living. You know, we've all rehearsed our songs and we've sung them 1,000 times, but the audience has to believe that your character is saying these words or singing these words for the very first time. And I think having that level of spontaneity in your performance would be the thing I would hope to give most note. I don't know that I do, but in a perfect world, I would be giving that.
Probably different in the last 6 weeks with Zoom.
Yes.
His second question is, what is your favorite routine or tradition? Do you have a ritual that you experience when you're trying to create a new work?
Oh,
okay.
Okay, so there's a superstitious ritual, is that there is a song I sing before every performance of mine. And that song, it just circles back to a previous answer. That song is I Believe in You by Frank Lesser from How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I have a tradition of singing that somewhere, somehow, before any performance of mine, whether I am musical director, whether I'm a musician, or whether I'm the author who is just watching it. So that's the superstitious tradition. The ritual, and I have this as an example. Make a lot of lists. As I am coming up with a lyric, I am making dozens and dozens of lists. Lists that characters might say, lists of possible titles for songs, lists of ideas that support the title, as if the title is the thesis sentence of a paragraph in a term paper you're writing. You know how we're all taught to write with thesis sentence and those little supportive sentences that follow in the paragraph. I'm constantly writing those because I use the title to structure the thoughts of the character singing the song, so that every title you use is going to be supported by a bunch of supportive sentences. I also make lists of possible rhymes or possible meanings of the title, because ideally the title is going to have more than one meaning. I'm writing a song now, and like the latest draft is by my bedside because I was writing it in the middle of the night last night. That's called "I Got a Goal." And in my mind, I'm going to figure out some way that this refers to soccer. You know, because the soccer player could get a goal too. Really, it's about a character who has a goal, but I'm thinking about, well, maybe I could use this title in some other way and somehow get my character onto a soccer field. Probably isn't going to happen, but that's the sort of thing I might jot down on one of my endless lists.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Well, good luck with that.
Yes.
better you than me. That's awesome. Well, we are reaching almost our 30-minute mark. Time goes quickly. I know. I could go on for a long time. So Karen reminded me, she's the one that asked about, she just reminded me when you said empathy, that's the reason fantasy actually does what they do, is because we really fully believe that children need to be exposed to the theater. It's just so huge. So thank you for that. She has one more question for a young songwriter. What is your best advice for practicing the discipline of writing?
Oh, okay. There's something that I did. Oh, all right. Right. You can do this two different ways. When I was a kid, that is a teenager, I got out a book of lyrics. And I would stare at the lyrics to any song that I didn't know, and I would write a tune to it. So that way I could collaborate with an existing lyric. That is, I consider Lorenz Hart the greatest of all lyricists. And there was a lyric that he wrote called "You Are So Fair." And I would sit there and stare at it and write my own melody to it without ever knowing the Richard Rodgers melody. And that's kind of an important part of the process. The other thing you can do is there's always music, or there's always an easy listening station, or somewhere on your radio dial you can hear music that's to songs, but they're not singing it. It's just instrumental music. And you can listen to those tracks and make up your own lyric to existing melodies. So this way, the way I've suggested, it's covering both what a composer does and what a lyricist does. And I have done both of those things, even though I'm a composer lyricist. But at some point in the process, I'm going to have one without the other. So I'm going to want to practice. That's the practice, is to make up new lyrics to existing tunes, or to come up with tunes to existing lyrics if you can find a lyric book. And you can. There's a volume called Reading Lyrics. I know I used my teacher Lehman Engel's book called Their Words Are Music. I know that one's out of print, but you can also find the complete lyrics of Cole Porter or Lorenz Hart or Irving Berlin or Stephen Sondheim. They're all published as lyric books, and you can always find a lyric that you don't know the tune to.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, that's fun. All right, maybe I can even do that. I'm not very creative in that, but that sounds like something fun I could try and do.
It's fun, yeah.
All right, well, we are about at time. It looks like we need to wrap up. Do you have anything that you would like to say, wrap up with?
Yeah, this is really brief. But, you know, I've been teaching musical theater performance for 13 years at a college in New Jersey. And one of the things that I would do, because it was so exciting to have my own class, and I thought, well, I know how I want this class to begin. It's going to begin with me saying, "Greetings, storytellers." Because as musical theater performers, you're telling a story. And I just wanted to start every class, you know, every September, by saying to my new class, "Greetings, storytellers," because I wanted everybody to understand that that's what we're here to do. We are just telling a story. And we're telling a story whether we're musical theater writers like me or performers like many of you.
Mhm.
And we all have our eyes on the same prize, to tell a story so effectively that that audience is moved to laughter or moved to tears or moved to whatever it is, moved to excitement, moved to interest. And we do that through storytelling methods, and our methods might be different. We might be composing music that tells a story, or we might be singing in such a way that we tell a story. And that's, I think, the one thing to leave you with is the first two words that I would have if we were doing a musical theater performance class. Greetings, storytellers.
I love that. That's so funny because we teach in all of our classes. If you've taken any of our academy, we learn a little song and it says the job of an actor is to tell a story. So there you go. That's perfect. Well, Noel, this has been such a pleasure and it is such a treat. And I just thank you so much for joining us. I could probably talk to you for hours.
Well, thanks for joining me, Megan. I very much appreciate it because I realize that for others who've been in this chair, they're reading a scroll, and it's much more personal.
Yeah.
You there as the human representative of everybody who's actually typing in a box.
It takes some of the pressure off. I'll take all the questions. So, well, have a good night. Take care. Best of luck in rehearsals with Zoom, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Oh, I would look forward to that as well.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.